What I'm about to tell you is a story of one of the creepiest places in Afghanistan with an immensely chilling background. This is OP Rock Base in Afghanistan. OP or Observation Point Rock was a base in Afghanistan near Patrol Base Hassanabad, somewhere in the region of Helmand. In 2008, this place was in the hands of the Taliban, but after a series of bombing raids, the NATO took a hold of this place and has been guarding it since. And since 2009, very chilling experiences have emerged from witnesses of the paranormal events that have gone on in this place. Here is just one story that stands out the most. Our story starts off with the British contingent of soldiers leaving this place as they were part of NATO. They were switching over with an American squad headed by Sergeant Green, his second-in-command Corporal Lena, and squad members Zolik, Smith, Wilson and Mott. It seems the British soldiers were very happy leaving this place. They looked tired and weary, as if they'd been through many sleepless nights. The British commander handed over the reins of an excellent but tired dog called Ugly Betty, and Corporal Lena, fond of dogs, immediately took responsibility of this hard-working mutt. Before leaving, the commander had a few words of advice. He advised the new company to not dig up anything, and if they decided to dig up anything, they needed to put it back in the place they found it. This was because the base was surrounded by trenches to aid the soldiers in fighting the local Taliban. Of course, they laughed it off, thinking the Brits were just playing with them, but events later proved otherwise. Later that night, Sergeant Green tried the radio at observation point, whilst Corporal Lena was on watch for Talibans roaming near the area. He, however, heard funny noises coming from the radio. He must have thought it was a battery issue, so he grabbed a new pair and replaced it and thought that was the end of that. In the next few days, Corporal Lena noticed how the trenches around the post hadn't been dug deep enough and decided that they were going to dig even deeper. Two squad members, Wilson and Smith, began their digging and dug up an old metal case with Russian writings embedded into it. They knew the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, so they didn't think anything of it at that time. So they began digging even deeper, and Smith dug up a rather large bone. Corporal Lena immediately recognized that as human femur. They didn't know what to do with it, so they decided to put it back where they found it. But they noticed something, that whenever they began digging at any of the trenches around them, they would dig up bones, and it would happen repeatedly. A few nights later, Corporal Lena heard a blood-curdling scream in the middle of the night. Thinking one of the squad members was captured by the Taliban, she rushed out of bed, grabbing her gun. Smith and Wilson were also awake along with Mott. They all heard the scream and began searching the post for signs of where the scream came from, but they couldn't find it. And when Mott suggested it could have been someone from the razor wire near the post, they began their search over there. But then they noticed movement from the distance and reached for their guns. However, it was only Ugly Betty. This incident left them confused, as no dog could make a blood-curdling scream that sounded human. So they just ignored this incident as normal fatigue and went back to sleep. Next morning, Lena did try to find the source of this, but there was no tracks or anything to indicate that there had been someone there. A few days later, Zolik was on watch during the day, and the heat was beating down on him so hard. All of a sudden, he felt a cold chill sweep his face, along with a voice whispering something in Russian. He would have just put it down as suffering from heat fatigue, but he heard footsteps from above and thought it was Smith playing a prank on him. He went to check above, but no one was there. But things got even weirder when he began scanning the post using his thermal scope. He discovered a soldier out in the distance staring back at him with his fists balled up. Zolik was very quick to assume a combat stance and aimed right at the soldier, but he hesitated. Was it one of ours? He thought. His eyes glanced sideways for a bit, and the soldier was gone. Zolik then requested to transfer from this unit, and it was granted. Animals have this sixth sense that allows them to see and hear things that we normally can't. They sense imminent danger, or they sense if someone is there. Therefore, Ugly Betty, their dog, would always bark during the day and night for some odd reason. A few days after Zolik was gone, Ugly Betty was barking ravenously in the distance in the night. Corporal Lena was on watch, and he was alerted by this unusual barking. He switched to his night vision goggles and saw what seemed to be a Taliban fighter in the distance, but he was alone. She wasn't sure what was going on and wanted to double check, so she switched to her thermal scope, and the figure disappeared. There was no heat signature. Confused, she switched back to her night vision goggles, and the Taliban moved 100 meters closer to him. Scared, he took up a combat stance and began switching ferociously between two scopes until he couldn't see the fighter, until a light tap on his shoulders. His body remained frozen for a moment, and he turned to see who it was, and there was no one there. Lena finally understood why Zolik left, but these occurrences didn't just stop there. Mott was on watch with Smith one evening. He heard footsteps behind him, thinking it was Sergeant Green. He turned around to check it out. It wasn't. There was no one there, and Ugly Betty began growling all of a sudden. He switched to thermal optics, and the only heat signatures were of Ugly Betty and Smith. He asked Smith if he saw something, and Smith said no, so he just shrugged it off. But it happened again, and Ugly Betty began growling again. This time it felt like someone breathed on him. Then he realized that Zolik was right about this place. And just like Zolik, one night, Wilson, another member, was also hit by a cold chill, followed by Russian whispers in his ear. But there was no one when he turned around. On the final day of their posting in OP Rock Base, the squad's radio had gone silent, despite fitting 2 new brand batteries. They fitted a third one, and that went silent in just a few minutes. And now they were stuck with no one to radio for help. Wilson, as usual, on top with his machine gun. But this time he was ready for more Russian whispers, more mind games this time. When all of a sudden he heard the sound of a machine gun firing. At this point everyone knew what was happening to them and all the paranormal events that happened to each squad member. Corporal Lena ran up to where Wilson was and saw that he hadn't fired his gun. Not a single round had been shot, so where was this sound coming from? Then, all of a sudden, the sound of a flying RPG hit. There was no sound of impact, and there was no signs of Taliban, and they switched back and forth between the thermal imaging and night vision goggles, but they couldn't find anyone or where the source of these sounds were coming from. There was absolutely no one there. Later on, when they finally left the base, they found out. They found out the gruesome history behind this base. This post originally belonged to the Mujahideen, but in the 80s it was bombed to bits by the Soviets, who killed all of the Mujahideens hiding inside. Then later, the Mujahideen, or the Taliban, retook this place by killing the Soviets. They held on to this place for a few years, then it was passed on to the Taliban. Then the Marines took it from the Taliban and buried all the dead bodies found under the post. This place wasn't a post to defend from the Taliban. This place was a giant mass of burial sites for restless spirits, and it still is today. Thank you for watching. Take care.